Okay, we're working with Photoshop and RAW files. And these files are pictures we've taken in a very dark room with a single light source above it as we can, and still have the lighting look good. I also have a piece of white paper in the frame, so that we can use that for color balancing. So in order to take our usually iPhone pictures, and iPhone can't take RAW, we did put it on the maximum setting for our cameras. The RAW files allow you the opportunity to adjust settings before you open the file. So we are going to start by opening up our, we're going to open up the cast one because I think that was a good one. So the DNG are the RAW files from the iPhone. So when I go to open this up, it is going to give me this dialog window, which is the camera RAW options. And so the photo captured a lot of different options, kind of exposure levels. And usually I don't know a lot about this. So what I know, my friend Dave kind of helped me a little bit, but I'm just kind of going on what I've tried before. So that's what I'm kind of sharing here. Usually the first thing I do is under color, there's this little eyedropper thing, and that's going to be where I sample the white balance tool. So I'm going to click on this white piece of paper, and hopefully it does a thing. And it didn't really seem to do much of anything. You can see the difference if you go with this little eyedropper. You can kind of see the difference. So if I hold it down, that's not with it, that's with it. That's without it, that's with it.
I know, I was just looking.
So can you see the difference?
Are we allowed to talk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're going to be recording it and people are going to be listening to it, so just keep that in mind. So
I see the difference though, yeah.
you do see the difference. Okay. So that's allowing the piece of paper to give us the temperature balance. And if I do that in different places, it's going to give me vastly different things. So I could also do the white of the cast.
Yeah.
So if I want the white on the cast to read as white,
Yeah.
I might want to do that instead. That's also an option.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's really all I do there for now. And then under light, there's exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Now, I'm not totally sure. So whites, I think, are those extreme whites. So you can see up here, there's this. Actually, I take it back because now I'm looking as you hover over here. The blacks are the darkest darks. The shadows are this low range.
Okay.
The exposure kind of helps deal with contrast. The highlights are this lighter range, and then the whites are
Okay.
Something else.
right up here, way up here. So you can see that each one of these things deals with a different range. So if I take just, let's say the highlights, so these are the highlights right here in this little zone here, that's going to crunch all those down or scream them up high. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So they start out at 0, and you can make adjustments. So you can, I feel like this is looking pretty good, although I feel like the shadows could maybe be compressed a little bit more. So I might play around with how, so you can see how if I drag this up a lot, you can see what's happening to the histogram up there, but also what's happening on the screen. So even as painters, we know that the shadows need to stay relatively compressed for what we like, and we also are trying to stay true to what the painting looks like. So I want to make sure that I'm seeing, a difference between. You're also going to get these little red. These things get red when you're starting to clip.
What does that mean?
You know, an audio like kind of gets crunchy when you get too loud, right? It chops or it clips off audio because it's either too loud or too high or whatever. So what you're doing is you're actually manually compressing some of that information. So you can see it goes red when I'm starting to like lose information in the lights. You can see what's happening here
Yes,
where
it's all
we've
blowing
lost. Yeah, we're blowing out the information. So we're clipping those levels right there. So we're trying to retain, number one, a difference between our brightest brights and those values in the arm, but we also don't want to overdo it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to keep that not from being clipped at the right-hand side, and on the low ends, you can kind of see I'm getting like dangerous here. Well, it gives me yellow. I don't know why it doesn't give me red there, but you can kind of see what's happening there. And you can play with the shadows. Those are a little bit more of your almost darkest darks. And you can play with contrast. So that's going to kind of do, you see, you're spreading apart the lights and the darks when you're playing with the contrast. So if I drop contrast, it's pushing everything to the center. If I spread it apart, it's going to make it more contrasty, which that seems pretty obvious. So let's see, for this one, I'm feeling like that feels pretty good, although my shadows I might darken a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like you can.
So is there no
And we can
way-
also drop exposure. So exposure actually brings everything down.
Mhm.
So I don't necessarily want it. So maybe if we do bring the exposure down just a little bit and then bring those shadows back up just a tiny bit, because I want a difference here between your shadows and your
I feel like that shadow's darker in the painting too.
yeah, so that's where I'm trying to so I guess this would be, I wonder if I could drag this. Oh, I can. Look at that. So that's really pushing the exposure, and then I can just push those highlights up.
So there's no way to just isolate like shadows. Like you'll always get some interference in another section by making an adjustment. Like so you know what I mean? Like there's always gonna be semi-clipping.
Sort of. So you can see. So by dropping the exposure, I took all of this, and I kind of nudged everything down to the left. That's exposure, right? So by doing that, it takes my mid-range, it takes everything and makes it darker. But now I can take my highlights and my whites and actually raise those up a bit. So that's actually what I'm doing, because I'm trying to make sure that this shadow is true to what we're seeing. And to do that, I had to just drop the exposure of everything and then just punch the lights back up. So here I can play with getting these to push a little bit. You see I'm moving this up here. And I feel like that's
The
maybe
shadow feels a little
closer
better.
Yeah.
to what we're seeing.
And the relationship between the whitest white and then the lightest part on the arm feels accurate with the painting too.
Yeah, so it's darker, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
much,
the
yeah, it's
background
actually
feels-
much darker.
I mean, it does help if you also have the painting to reference. So this to me has more of a
Right.
true feeling to what we're seeing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm good with this. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna just say, sweet, open that. Okay, so it opens it. Great. The first thing I usually do is try to crop down to close enough where I'm not chopping anything off. And then I crop that. This allows me to see if it's square or not, or if I need to change the perspective on it, because a lot of times when we're trying to avoid glare, taking a slightly angled down picture can be helpful. In this instance, it is varnished. We are in a dark room. We're trying not to reflect ourselves in the image. So when I'm trying to change the this distortion, I'm a little lazy about it. But as long as my layer is unlocked, I do edit. No, I'm not selected on my layer.
Oh, is that part in? Oh yeah, you're
Edit.
saying it.
Yep, edit, transform, distort. So I just take the corners and I try to pull this and make it as square as possible with the frame.
Yeah.
And this at least makes sure that when I do my next steps and I reproportion it so it's at scale. So I'm gonna crop in to exactly the corners. And because this maybe was taken at slightly an angle, so now I'm gonna, a little bit more. Because I took this at slightly an angle, there might be some distortion. So this is why I'm trying to, that's why I want to make sure that I make it the correct size by the end of this. So I'm just zooming in just right. But I'm making sure I'm not including any of the background as well. Okay, so we have this picture. It might not be the right scale. So what I want to do now is I have this picture, great, and I'm going to go to image. I should have just recorded the whole screen because you can't see the files, but this is under image size. And so it's 11 by 14. So this captured, the raw file captured an 8 by 10 at 300 DPI, which is great resolution. It's in inches right now, but if it's in pixels, you'll see how many pixels it is, pixels per pixels. It's 2,474 by 3134, and that's 300 DPI. So those, if I were to make this 72 DPI and still that same number of pixels, you don't want to change the number of pixels. You don't want to make it more pixels. So I usually just try to go by inches to start, so I can just see scale wise that this is the correct proportion. So in order to do this, because it might be a little squashed in one direction because of that angling of the camera, what I want to do is make sure it's the right size. So we said this is 11 by 14, right? So what I'm going to do here, if I made this 11, it's going to make, well, actually it's not bad.
Pretty close.
11 by 13.9. That's,
really
but we'll make it exact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is uncheck the linking. So this is saying it's, going to make it same proportional, but we don't want it to be proportional. So let's say if this was like 11 by 16 and it should be 11 by 14, I need to unlink the proportions. So now I can type in 14. So now it's exactly 11 by 14, but here's the problem. I created twice as many pixels.
Yeah.
So I don't want to confirm this yet. What I need to do is drop the resolution for now so that I at least know that I'm not inventing pixels in this picture. Does that make sense? So we're making a bigger file, but at a smaller resolution, so we still have the same number of pixels. Does that make sense?
So it might lose a little bit of like fidelity, but it's so small of a.
Well, it won't lose any fidelity if I'm not making the file size bigger than it started.
Oh, so you can increase size but not lose.
Right. So what I'm going to do is, this is twice as many. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try 150 DPI.
Okay.
So that's way less. I don't need that. I can actually, now I'm going to try 200. 200 because I want to match 44 if I can.
Oh, it was 44. Okay.
Yeah, so I can go, maybe I'm going to try 250 now. Nope, that's too big. So now I'm going to go to 225.
Not bad.
220.
Oh my god, I was gonna say 220.
Okay, well, you're right on.
Wow.
So 220, if I press OK, it's going to make this file size just slightly smaller. But again, look at those pixels, 2420 by 3080. That was really close to what we started with. So we're not changing any of the pixels.
Right.
Okay. So now this should be both in proportion and the right size.
Can I just ask though, when we changed the resolution, right? That was what we changed. So does ultimately that mean that if we were to print this at scale, like really big, that's where it would show up?
Yeah. So right now, if you printed this out, normally print files you want at 300 DPI. That's what magazines like, but they're never asking you for like the full size
It's
image
never the full size,
at 300
so it doesn't
DPI.
matter.
They're usually looking for like, they'll tell you, oh, I want an image that's at least 2,000 pixels on the longest dimension. Okay, so if you're going to do that, you would go to image. First of all, you'd save this. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file because I want to save it. Just if whatever happens right now, I can always like go in and make changes because I'm also going to get rid of these speckly things in here. Okay, so I'm just going to save this to the desktop as just cast. Okay, I just like to have a Photoshop file available to me. So now, like what we opened, the raw file, I still have the raw file. I could still reopen that and make a bunch of adjustments. But now I have everything I've done up until this point.
Right.
Okay, so now with this Photoshop file, I can save as a JPEG. That's going to be my highest resolution JPEG. I could save a web resolution. I can save all different types of resolutions using this Photoshop file or the original high-res picture, which I would save this at like just cast high-res. Okay, so that's so if I go File, Save a Copy, JPEG, just cast high res. So this is the highest resolution image. And I'm just going to save it to my desktop.
So, like, can I just ask, if we were just say we were doing a print at that size, this one would be probably the one to do, the high res?
Yes. You can't get any higher resolution than this. So let's say somebody's asking you for a print file, like a magazine or a gallery, or you want to do a print and they need a 300 DPI.
So you would want
So if I'm going to create a file now that is 300 DPI, I'm going to see the maximum size it can be. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go image, image size, and I'm going to go, so at this point, because I like the proportions, I'm going to link it. Right. So if I need it to be 300 DPI, right? Here, this is a problem because we have more pixels than we started with. So I need to make a smaller, like physically smaller. So what if I did 7 by 8.9? I could do that. Let's see what happens when I do 8. So 8, you see how I didn't make any new pixels? I can make an 8 by 10 at 300 DPI and I'm good. And again, look at the pixels. Same number of pixels. We haven't changed anything. If I made a small file, I can't make it big again. So this is not changing the number of pixels. This is just changing how distributed those pixels are. Think of our paint films and think of paint films with the paint particles. A glaze versus opacity. 300 DPI is an opaque statement. And then think about the same amount of paint glazed over a larger surface. So big file, small DPI is like a glaze. And a smaller file with a higher resolution is like an opaque, dense application of the same amount of paint.
So that's why it wants to like fill in on the big
Exactly.
file.
So if you're asking for a huge file with high resolution, it's basically saying now I have to invent pixels. And that's when you've ever tried to zoom up on a really low res picture, it's all pixely. It's literally invented.
Because it didn't have a good underpainting.
Okay. All right. So that's changing the file size. And, Photoshop has a really great option. If you go under File and you do Export, Save for Web, this is my favorite thing to do because this is huge. There's no way I'm going to put this on my website. It's going to take 8 million years to load. It's almost a megabyte, right? I don't want that. So all I'm going to do is take my image size and say, for my website, I really don't want it to be any more than, 900 wide. So I'm changing the image size down here. I can also make it like lower quality if I want to, but I usually stick at 80, but now it's down to 150, right? So then I can save that out, and I'm just going to save it as just cast web. Right, so that just exported a much smaller file size and image that goes directly on my website. It's minimal information and fast loading time. But for a magazine or just our highest res picture, that's what we want. Okay, so then the last thing I'll show you is there's all these like little speckly things, which happens when we have like lint or whatever. It happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer because I want to, let's see, in here there's duplicate layer. So now we have 2 layers. We're going to have the clean, and then this is going to be our dusty layer. So in the clean layer, if you go under filter, that's the filter in the drop down, and then under dust and scratches. Okay, so what's really cool about this is, look, they all disappeared, but it also, it kind of softens things. So it's kind of, so you see, you can kind of see what's happening up here. You see how it makes it really soft? So if I turn off preview, you can kind of see what's happening here. But if you zoom up here, that's what it looks like. You've got scratches in your cast.
Right, so it's like,
but it's kind of getting them out. So that's a problem, right? But it does get rid of all that dusty stuff. So if I did a radius of like 9 pixels, it's really softening everything. If I do a radius of like 2 pixels, it's doing a little less. Let's try let's try 3 pixels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's just making sure that it's going to get rid of it. That got rid of most of it, right? But if I zoom up, some of my dust and scratches in the cast, some of my scratches in the cast are now, if I hide this, you can kind of see the difference.
Yeah.
So we want to retain, we want to retain that sharpness. So what we're going to do is we're going to, actually I'm going to drag the clean layer under the dusty layer. So what we want to do is all the areas where it's dusty is get rid of that. So if you can get comfortable with using masks on layer, masks are not destructive. You can always come back to that layer the way it is. So I'm just going to do this quickly. You might have to do some Googling on how to do this if
you also have that Photoshop video.
Yeah, I do. That's going into masks, the Photoshop for Artists video. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the dusty layer and I'm going to add a mask. That's what this little box with a circle in it is. Mm-hmm. And you can, if you open it, you can see, you can watch this quick video. We're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So if you think about white as fully opaque and black as fully transparent and gray as anything in between, that's what we're trying to interpret the layer as. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint black. Now I have this massive thing. I'm going to paint black anywhere that I want the dusty layer to go away and I want the clean layer to show through.
That's nice.
So I'm going to do this in the areas that I need it. So I don't necessarily need it on everything. I just need it in those really dark. And sometimes I'll even do this where I'll just
just do pinpoint.
I'll go plop.
Oh yeah, I'm doing that.
Plop. I know you have a lot of dark paintings, so that makes sense for you.
Yeah, just do them selectively at a smaller level. Okay, good.
And then you can use a bigger one for...
This is where using a smaller brush works better than a big brush.
So I don't want to lose the sharpness of edges if I have them.
Right.
But I do want to get rid of... So X goes back and forth between black and white.
Okay.
So you can see here, over here, this is what you can see where I've really put a lot of the black because I want a lot of that to show through, because those are where most of the scratches are presenting themselves.
Can you just and then edit undo it? Can you just do the white like the opaque? I'm just curious to see what would happen.
What do you mean? Where do you want to do that?
Anywhere. What is the? You said the white's opaque.
It would undo it, right?
Yeah, you see how it just made this like little white line there?
Oh, so it would just undo what you do, but okay.
Yeah.
So
what's happening is, if I get rid of that, you can kind of see.
Yeah,
so this is the transparency.
Right.
So you can kind of see where I also have a soft edged brush right now, which you can see has softer edges, but I can change the hardness of those edges in here. Mm-hmm. So you're just showing a fuzzy layer underneath that has gotten rid of the dust and scratches. Mm-hmm. And again, this is why I'd be like, okay, save this file.
Yeah.
Because let's say, I accidentally, all my details look like they went away. I want to be able to go back and undo it. So it doesn't make any sense for me to save the files before this because we were going to take the dust and scratches out. Mm-hmm. But this is, the layer masks is one of the best things you can do to do photo manipulation, or if you're trying to manipulate reference. Yeah. But in terms of when you're taking pictures of your work, the biggest thing is taking a picture without glare, making sure the values and colors look the way that you painted it.
Right.
And it is presentable. But as a juror, I have seen some horrible submissions that I can barely even tell what is in the painting because the glare is so bad, and the colors definitely look way too compressed. So the ability to use the camera raw is actually a really beneficial thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
But there are still things that you're going to want to do in Photoshop
Yeah.
to
Make it more accurate.
yeah, to make it more accurate. And it's about good presentation. It's amazing how much even just that can make a really big difference in how your work is perceived.
Yeah.